What's up guys, it's your boy Goblins, and today we're talking about that I am a heretic build, and I'm gonna run through this really quick with you guys just because it is a hybrid build. It doesn't require me to talk about a lot, and a lot of this stuff we have of course covered before in past build guide videos talking about spells, sorceries, so on and so forth. So what we're going to be going over in this build guide is just stats, gear, and the spells I was using in that exact video. And those are the spells realistically that you want to be using for this build, with maybe a couple extra swaps and whatnot. But we'll get into that, we'll talk about that. So the reason I called this I am a heretic is because according to the Dark Souls lore, if you're channeling faith into sorcery, it is considered looked down upon, and it directly reads that in Archdeacon's great staff in the description, and it says, the Archdeacon McDonald's trespass, the sin of channeling faith for sorcery, transformed what was once merely a symbol of ecclesiastic authority into a catalyst of sorceries. Ecclesiastic? Oh man, that's a word. Now the only other item that does this in the game is actually the Golden Ritual Spear. Now something I like to note about this little piece of lore here is that the Golden Ritual Spear actually doesn't suggest that sorceries being channeled through faith was not a sin and was actually a common practice for the Dark Moon Knights. So it's interesting to see what's sinful in Dark Souls 3 lore and not so sinful in Dark Souls 1 lore, because the Dark Moon Blades were like the good guys. Well, they're cops, essentially. The Dark Moon Blades are cops. Like, that's straight up what they are. From Dark Souls 1 through Dark Souls 3, Blue Sentinels and Dark Moon Blades are literally police officers. But they're not sinful police officers when they're channeling faith for sorceries. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, so let's talk about the stats here. I am soul level 122. I've got Vigor at 20, Attunement at 40, Endurance at 15, Vitality at 10, Strength at 12, Dexterity at 15, Intelligence at 32, and Faith at 60, Luck at 7. So what we call these items, such as the Golden Ritual Spear and Archdeacon's Great Staff, we call them reverse casting catalysts. So when I say reverse casting as a term, I mean, it does channel the opposite stat into whatever you're casting. So the reason for 60 faith is so you get max damage on your faith, which is the soft cap, and then intelligence at 32 just to actually have the requirements met to cast the spells. Because unfortunately, you still have to have the requirement for the spell itself in order to cast that spell. But having 60 faith will give you max damage on whatever spell you are casting through reverse casting catalysts, such as, once again, Golden Ritual Spear and Archdeacon's Great Staff. As per usual, I have my attunement at 40, and I have even more attunement slots than necessary, most likely. So if you guys are going to run this build, run it however you'd like. This is just the way I like to play, and I mention this almost in all my build guides. 40 attunement is just what I'm used to, and it's how I've always been, okay? So people can hate on my 20 vigor, 15 endurance, but that's okay. I'm okay with that. I do well in PvP, I do just fine in PvE. There's literally nothing wrong with that. Now, honestly, having your attunement that high isn't a bad idea, and I actually use an attunement ring on this build as well to get me even more attunement slots. Now, the reason for this is because offensive miracles, most good offensive miracles that is, they require 2 slots to actually be used. Whereas sorcery is not so much the case until you get to the higher end sorceries. Now, as for the gear, I've got Archdeacon's Great Staff at +5. Once again, it is reverse casting, it scales off faith. I have S scaling off faith on this bad boy here, but it allows me to cast sorceries, which is great. I got the Sunlight Talisman +10 and Yorshka's Chime +10. Now, I've been through this before with my cleric build. Sunlight Talisman gives the best hyper armor. So a couple of you guys have been saying, like, Goblins use Saint's Tally, like it is the best. Saint's Tally +10 is way better. Look at, like, I mean, just look at the spell buff, for example, okay? And as well as the scaling. So you get S scaling off Saint's Tally +10. And the spell buff is a big difference versus the Sunlight Tally. But the reason the Sunlight Tally is actually better for PvP and sometimes PvE is for its hyper armor. So let me just demonstrate really quick what I mean by this. So with Saint's Tally here, I'm just gonna go ahead and kill this guy with lightning stake here. So we're just gonna roll on up there. I'm gonna toss on my hyper armor and hope that it hits him. So we're just gonna get in there and come on, let's go. So as you can see, he interrupts me. I get disrupted, my casting gets disrupted, and it's not so good. I deal great damage, don't get me wrong, I deal fantastic damage, but if I get hit, probably not ideal. Now the Sunlight Tally, let me just show you guys, has crazy hyper armor, better than Saint's Talisman. So I'm just gonna roll on in here, don't even care, you can hit me, it's fine. It's fine, no big deal. Dealing quite a bit less damage, but as you guys could see there, I was getting hit and my casting wasn't stopped. It wasn't interrupted whatsoever. So that's the benefit of having Sunlight Tally, because you can use that, for example, with Lightning Storm here, and be casting that, and you know, it adds a lot of aggression. It keeps people at bay, which is really helpful. So that's why you want to use Sunlight Tally most likely. It's just that the Unfaltering Prayer on Saint's Tally isn't worth as much as I think some people make it to be. I will say that Tallies cast slightly faster, so if you're using Saint's Tally for the slightly faster casting time compared to Yorshka's Chime, that's probably the best alternative to it. But otherwise, stick with a Sunlight Tally for hyper armor and Yorshka's Chime for damage. Now, the aesthetic gear I'm wearing is Xanthos Crown, Deacon Robe, Conjurator Manchettes, Xanthos Trousers. So I wanted to fit in the theme of all these bandages and shit because, you know, I thought it looked cool. And Xanthos Crown is like a big old bandage crown, and Conjurator Manchettes are pretty much just bandages. Xanthos Trousers are bandages, and then the Deacon Robe to represent that extra little bit of crazy, dark, heretical type. You know what I'm saying? Like, super spoopy. Too spoopy 5 me. And I like that look. I think it looks badass. This is a heretic right here. This is a dude that doesn't go by the rules of doing things. He's doing his own thing, being super crazy with the staff that is sinful, and you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Yeah, he's crazy. He's a crazy guy. So that's kind of the idea behind the fashion on that one. I thought it was pretty cool. Now for my rings, I'm wearing Bellowing Dragon Crest Ring, Ring of the Sun's Firstborn, Sage Ring, and Dark Moon Ring. So like I said, the attunement slots on this guy. Like, you need a lot of attunement if you want to use what I'm using. But you don't have to use what I'm using. You guys can play however you want to play. It's just that having the mass amounts of spells that at my disposal to add aggression, use its utility, use a stagger, and uses damage is all very necessary to me in PvP especially. Once again, that's just me though, and having the Dark Moon Ring adds 2 additional attunement slots. It's very helpful if you plan on playing like I do. Then of course Sage Ring, once again another big no-brainer, gives you max casting speed at 15 dexterity. Very necessary, and of course the +1 and +2 versions of that are very helpful as well. I just like using the regular versions to show you guys that you can do this in regular new game. I don't want to get you guys confused on, you know, +1 and +2 items and rings and whatnot, because most people will most likely play new game, maybe new game plus, and that's probably about it. But of course diehards such as myself will play this game over and over again, and that's a little bit different. So now Ring of the Sun's Firstborn, self-explanatory, it greatly boosts your miracles, and Bellowing Dragon Crest Ring, of course, greatly boosts your sorceries. If I was a pure caster of some type, I would just be focusing all my ring synergy on one type of casting type, but because this requires 2 schools of casting types, I am wearing the best for both rings. And now we move on to the spells. So here's my selection of spells and my organization that I have going on. I mentioned this before, that your spell organization is very important for casting and comboing things up. Otherwise, of course, if you can click fast enough through your spells and whatnot, it's not so bad. But otherwise, try and set up for combos and try and set up for things that you would use in particular order. So, of course, the Sunlight Spear here is, you know, one of your big powerhouses. Hits pretty hard, of course. With Sunlight Tally, for example, in PvP, you'd be hitting 550 and whatnot if you have the same setup as myself. You can throw on the clutch rings if you'd like to. I do not recommend it for PvP anymore. That was a big thing that I always said, like, you know, clutch rings in PvP, they're awesome, but nowadays they're not so awesome, so maybe don't do that. But this is one of your main spells, very good for hitting enemies afar, and great thing about Sunlight Spear is if you hit enemies close up, it adds an additional lightning bolt that comes down from the sky and does even more damage. Next up is the Great Farron Dart. I love the Great Farron Dart. This thing's been sweet, even the sorcery guide and all that stuff. It is the ultimate poking utility. If someone's being really annoying in PvP, you can also be really annoying just by shooting this thing. If someone's, of course, at last hit, then you can hit them with this bad boy, and it actually will do that last hit for you. Very, very helpful in those situations, and of course, just adds that extra bit of aggression and poking ability against your opponents in PvP. And in PvE, it can be quite easy as well to use. You just use it for those situations where, once again, enemies have a couple last hits, you just quickly cast this guy and you're good to go. So, very important utility. I love this thing. It is one of my favorite spells, easily, hands down. And you can just straight up, you can win duels with just this if you wanted to. You might be annoying, but if you are good at keeping your distance and rolling away, this thing is sweet. Now next up is Lightning Storm, which is one of your biggest engagement spells right here. You want to use it with Sunlight Tally, and anytime someone's closing in on you, you just pop your Lightning Storm, and it, like I said, it gives massive stagger capabilities in PvP. And in PvE, it's quite helpful as well for keeping enemies at bay and keeping them away. Especially if they're weak mobs, you can keep them at a safe distance, which is really nice. And the nice part is, you use this with hyper armor, you can take some hits while those like weird things of lightning that like expand outwards, go and hit your enemies and whatnot. The closer they are to you and the further out they go, the more staggering capabilities they will have for you and destroying your enemies. So definitely use it whenever you can. This is one of my favorite spells to be using with these types of builds because it is very powerful and just has such fantastic staggering utility. It's quite OP for what it is. Now next up is Fair and Flash Sword. Once again, another personal favorite that I have for sorceries. Fantastic utility, has great staggering capabilities, hits really hard, only depending on, of course, on what catalyst you have and whatnot. So if you have a longer catalyst, that means you'll hit for longer, which makes it pretty much a lance, especially with Archdeacon's Great Staff. Otherwise, this thing will use more stamina the bigger your catalyst is when you're actually using it. So that is another thing to keep in mind, of course, for this type of spell. It is fantastic against anyone using any type of twin weapons, Gothard twin blades, Drang hammers, whatever else that you can imagine that are some form of twin daggers or twin whatever the fuck. This thing is insanely good as a counter. It's disgusting. It's so good. And people lose their minds at this. This staggers so hard, and it stops your enemies right dead in their feet. Another big thing you can use it, of course, for is last hits, which is another thing to mention on this one. Last hitting with this thing is awesome, just because it has such good range, it staggers, and not many people will expect it because it is so fast. Now, Lightning Stake is another huge one here. Once again, you'll want to use it with your Hyper Armor, and this is another really big engagement spell. You take it to your enemy, you just run at them. If anyone's being scared or is being a pansy in PvP, run at them with Stake. Lightning Stake is insane if you just get mad at people with it. It's fantastic. It's like my favorite thing, just rush at enemies with a lightning stake and just give them one of these. Just give them one, boom, big boom, like that. It's awesome. People get really afraid of lightning stake, and it even has a slight AoE to it. The AoE isn't fantastic damage, but when you hit it directly to the face, it's really good. And in that first clip where I defeated that guy that was using the Onakiri and Utabachi, I wrecked him with the lightning stick as a last hit. That was my favorite. It just went right through his hyper armor. It was so good. Now, last one I want to talk about is Soul Spear. I think Soul Spear is just handy to have because you can mix it up, of course, with that and the Sunlight Spear. Keeps people guessing, keeps them on their feet, and does pretty good damage. Goes right through the person as well. I don't know if in case there's enemies behind them in PvE and whatnot. In PvP, it's pretty cool because, once again, you can toss out a Soul Spear, then a Sunlight Spear to follow up, and once again, kind of keeps people guessing, and that's, you know, by then they're probably dead, and then by then they probably realize that you are some type of miracle sorcery hybrid build. Now, in that video, I used a couple alternatives. If you take your intelligence to 48 and whatnot, and 50, you can use these guys if you want to, but for this build, I feel like leaving that at 32, of course, for just at least Soul Spear is probably good enough. Otherwise, you might as well just be going 60 faith, 60 intelligence if you want to be like this crazy beefy caster type person. So I don't know, maybe we can make like an all spells type of build using that. Realistically, we could. That'd be kind of cool, actually. Maybe I'll do that. I don't know. Now, of course, you can use Homing Crystal Mass as well at level 30, which is really awesome as well. You only get 4 projectiles, but they still hit pretty hard and they do stagger a little bit. You can use it as a combo move and everything. You can also use Soul Greatsword. It has a ginormous hitting arc. Really good spell to be using. I mentioned that in my sorcery guide. It's a fantastic spell. Hits within like an 180-degree radius and kind of keeps people guessing, and like I said, it has a huge range on it. And if you don't want to use Soul Spear, you can always use Great Heavy Soul Arrow, which will probably deal more damage than anything, versus the Soul Spear. I just like the Soul Spear for its penetration, its aggressiveness, and how fast it moves. Now, before we finish, I will of course mention a couple things, and that is the biggest one being that in order to play any of these casting type, glass cannony type builds, with like barely any health and all the FP and everything in the world, you really need to think one step ahead of your opponent. Now, a lot of people are saying, oh, you know, you're fighting people that aren't that great at PvP, or you're fighting people that don't understand the mechanics behind it. Like, I have fought in good PvP players, and you simply just need to get into their head and understand what they're doing with their build. If they're using a greatsword, if they're using a longsword, if they're using a short sword, if they're using a dagger, whatever it is, know how to counter it and when you can counter it. We can talk about that in a different video if you guys would like as well, if that's something that interests you. But I play against both bad players and good players, and it doesn't matter if they're bad or good, I can still use my build and come out victorious and be successful, simply by staying 1 or 2 steps ahead of my enemy and what they might do or react to certain moves. That's all you have to do. Once you get into doing that, you'll master PvP and it's no problem. It's great. So that's everything I had to talk about for today, guys. As I always say, drop a like for your boy Goblins. And of course, I'll be back here with more Dark Souls videos. Kamundi on Reddit has posted a new regulation version, which is 1.09, and it's coming out July 1st, so on July 1st, I'll be making a video for that. Otherwise, I do have a couple other videos planned for you guys, so stay tuned for those as well. A couple other I am so on and so forth type builds, and a couple of them are not casters, which is great as well. You guys will be really into that as well. So take it easy, guys. Have a general good, and I'll see you in the next Dark Souls video. Peace out!